The exhibition Felix Feneon, Modern Times from Seurat to Matisse is on now at the Orangerie Museum in Paris. And to talk us through that show, I'm joined on the set by Kate Gamby, the director of Paris Muse. That's a group of art historians and educators who give private tours in Paris. Hi, Kate. Welcome.
Hi, Jeannie.
First things first, just who was Felix Feneon?
Felix Feneon was an art critic and gallerist that helped define the world of art in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He's credited for discovering Seurat and also championed Picasso and Matisse. It's because of him that some of these artists that we know today have become iconic.
And what's so fascinating about Felix Feneon is that he embodies many of the political paradoxes of his time. Tell us a bit more about that.
Right, he did. He is an anarchist. He's a very complicated person, very complex. He's an anarchist, but also he worked for the War Office in France. He did that for 13 years. He started off as a clerk and finished as a chief clerk. So he was considered a model employee at that time. So he did really well. But at the same time, he was active in anarchist circles. And in 1894, him and 29 others were arrested with a suspicion of conspiracy for a bombing and also for assassinating the French president.
It is pretty interesting. Government employee, also accused of assassinating the president. It does seem a bit strange.
It is weird. It's a certain time. But with his quick wit and lack of hard evidence, him and the others were acquitted from it.
And what's interesting about this show at the Orangerie is it tells the story of these great artists you were mentioning, also Modigliani, Seurat, that are seen through the eyes of Feneon. Tell us about that.
Right. It's a really interesting view. The Orangerie is giving us a backstage pass of how artists at the time were supported and promoted. So how did certain artists get more attention than others? And what determined what pictures are hanged on gallery walls? So it was actually influential art critics like Feneon who shaped this during these artists' lives. The galleries that he directed at the Bernheim Jeune also helped him to bring painters into the limelight and to give them contracts that would give them money to explore different art.
He did play these supportive roles to a point where he really had an influence on modern art, as you were saying before. In fact, in 1886, I learned he coined the term Neo-impressionism. What's
right.
Neo-impressionism?
Well, it literally means new impressionism, and he coined this phrase in his first and only publication that he did. And he really gave it a place in art history. So in it, artists at this time are experimenting with the science of vision and color and how the brain understands images. So you might have heard of pointillism or divisionism before, where small dots of color are juxtaposed side by side. When you step back, you see that it blends together to create a new hue, and they were definitely interested in this. So this actually opened, because these guys were able to experiment with this opened the door later to Impressionism, abstract art, and also how we see pixels on our smartphones and tablets.
It's interesting that pointillism has its influence again today. Feneon also was a precursor because he was one of the first to see potential in African art and oceanic arts, which are well loved here in France today.
Right. So his collection was over 1,500 pieces, and about a third of those, 543, were African art. So he really was the first to pose the question, are these pieces, can they be art in their own right? And not just artifacts or historical pieces, but really art in their own right. So as a journalist, he questioned and posed the question in a 1920s story, asking if these African arts can be included in the Louvre's collection. And about 50 years later, they were.
Indeed. And now they have their own museum
right.
in Paris as well.
Right.
One of the key works in the Orangerie show, we saw it a moment ago. We'll bring it back up. It's for the poster. It shows a portrait of Feneon by Paul Signac. But Feneon himself actually had some mixed feelings about this portrait.
Right. He was a man that didn't like to live in the spotlight. So he was very low key. He actually didn't want his name to be used for this. He wanted it to be called Portrait of a Man, but clearly you see it's Feneon. He's got this goatee that's just definitely his style, and is just lanky form. Signac made this, and he shows a kaleidoscope of color behind him. You know, the pointillism and stuff is happening there, just to show this new art form that is being born. He's forward-facing in profile to really show that he has this vision. In his left hand, you don't see it here, it's cut off, but he has a top hat. So for me, it conjures the idea of a magician, like just coming up with, making these forms and shapes out of nowhere.
And what about the orchid in his right hand?
Yes, that is an orchid in his right hand. It's, as you know, it's a difficult to grow flower. It takes a lot of, and so that's exactly what he did with this artist. He really nurtured and cared for this art form and kind of let it flourish.
It's fascinating. It was interesting preparing this, Kate. A lot of people had never heard of Felix Feneon. Is he still relevant today? And if so, why?
That's a good question. I think he is still relevant. As artists are taking chances and experimenting with new things, they really need people, dedicated people to support and encourage them, and also to say why art is important, why this is important. And I think he really played a big role in this, and this is important in his time 100 years ago, but it's also relevant today.
Kate, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about this exhibit. Kate Gamby, they're talking about Felix Feneon, Modern Times from Seurat to Matisse, on now at the Orangerie Museum in Paris through the end of January. And if you'd like to know more about private tours of that show or many other art exhibitions in Paris, be sure to check out the Paris Muse website, parismuse.com.